Okay, there we go. Well, who didn't see that coming? Picks from Joe's, the last one of the year before a bowl game. Maybe I'll do a few during the basketball season. Hate to end on that. I'll talk a little bit about the basketball here as we go along. This is going to be a pretty extended version. Got a lot to talk about. You know, least of which is Bedlam. Let's start with just an overall a good season. Lost a game that shouldn't have lost. The turnover fiasco, Spencer's turnover fiasco at Texas Tech. If you think about it, Oklahoma State could have ended up 9-3 pretty easily. Would have liked to have had that Texas game back, or at least gotten them later in the year when the defense was kind of had figured some stuff out. But I would say a good year, 8-4. Ton of people predicted this. Ended up technically finishing fourth. Ended up technically finishing fourth in the Big 12 tie, four-way tie for third, and Texas and OSU won the initial tiebreaker, and then once that first tiebreaker happens and you break teams out, then you start over with the remaining teams, and OSU loses the head-to-head to Texas, so they end up fourth. See what they'll happen with the bowl. If OU makes the playoff, pretty good shot. OSU, I think, worst case makes the Camping World Bowl. My previous post about the bowl outlook, I whiffed. I missed the Camping World Bowl, I believe. If we go there, let's just bring it up. Just to be clear, Big 12 bowl tie-ins. And if we scroll down here, there are the bowl tie-ins minus the this setup right here. So this year, the Peach and the Fiesta are the college football playoff. So if OU makes it to that, then Baylor falls into the New Year contract bowls. And then that would put Texas in position for the Alamo Bowl. And then that would put OSU in position for the Camping World Bowl. If OU doesn't make the playoff, then they're going to end up in the Sugar. Baylor will get the Alamo. Texas will probably get the Camping World, and then OSU would probably end up in the Texas Bowl. So a lot of I would hope they don't fall down in here. If they fall down to the Cheez-It or First Responder Bowl, they're going to end up playing a mid-major, and that just sucks. That's a dud. That takes what was most would say it'd be a successful season and turns it into a little bit of a dud. You really want to play another Power 5 team. I think a couple of things out there saying, maybe Texas A&M, maybe Notre Dame. God, Notre Dame would be fantastic. That would obviously be it. But I think Texas A&M would be a good one too. Be a lot of energy around that fan base wise. So we'll see. So Alamo Bowl, the OSU's fourth in the pecking order. So I don't think the Alamo Bowl is going to take Oklahoma State over Texas if it came that way. Don't know if the Camping World Bowl would take Oklahoma State over Texas if it fell like that. I don't think so. I think they usually stick pretty close to the pecking order as long as there aren't any repeats in there. I don't think there'd be any repeats in this bunch. Excuse me. I had some chicken salad for lunch, and it's repeating on me a little bit. A little too much information there. So anyway, OSU will take some needed time off. They're banged up. And so hopefully they'll. I just want to mute this microphone here. There we or mute the output. So so anyway, so there's that. We'll obviously wait till after championship weekend to see what happens. You got Baylor and Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. I would expect Oklahoma to win that game, and then really they need to be rooting for Oregon. If Utah goes out and dominates Oregon, there's no way OU's making the playoff. I don't think. I just don't think. Utah's already ranked above them. They've looked pretty dominant. I know the Pac-12 is crap, but the committee doesn't operate in a logical world. I'd pick OU head to head. I think all day against Utah. Not to say it wouldn't be a good game, but anyway. So that's that. Let's talk a little bit about hoops. As a lot of people know, I was there. I got to go to both games. What a treat. I tell you what, guys, Oklahoma State's got a good basketball team. They're young. They are young, but man, are they athletic. The Syracuse game, they started fast. Syracuse came back. I don't think Syracuse is as bad as people think they are. They're young at the point guard and they're young off the bench. I think Boeheim will get them. In shape. They'll be a borderline tournament team, I think. But Syracuse came back, went on a nice run, took a lead, took a nice little 8-9 point lead. And then Boyd and I called a timeout, and we were sitting close enough that you couldn't hear exactly what Boynton was saying, but you could hear it in his voice. He was speaking very firmly to the team. And let me tell you something. They came out of that timeout, and their intensity went from about a 6.5, 7 up to like 9.5. And it just overwhelmed Syracuse. The Syracuse strength is that zone defense. And the only way you really beat it, there's really only a couple of ways you beat it. You have to penetrate it first and have good play at the high post, and then people sneaking in on the backside of that if you penetrate the high post. The other way is if they're playing Syracuse, a lot of guys were saying it was a 2-3. They really play a 3-2 the way they run it. And if they're pretty consistent in how they're doing that, you can run some really high screens on that point guy out there at the top of the 3-2. And if you've got good guard play, then you can and a couple of good shooters on the wings, then you can maybe start to make some penetration and either hit the back line or whatever. But Oklahoma State was struggling with that. And they ended up doing that some in the second half, and that's when they really got away from Syracuse. But in the first half, they just turned up the intensity and created almost this kind of frantic atmosphere of basketball, not street ball, just bodies flying everywhere, and it just created an atmosphere on the court that just didn't allow Syracuse to really get their defense set up most of the time. And then that Mississippi State game, holy mackerel, that was just, they came out, and I tweeted out early in the game, it just felt like, even after just a couple of minutes, it felt like if Oklahoma State started hitting some shots that they'd get away with this, because Mississippi State couldn't handle the man-to-man. OSU's got good man-to-man defense. And man, oh man, it just, once they started hitting shots, that thing just blew wide open. Had a few knucklehead fans there now. Come on. I mean, just really, you gotta try to talk to the coaches while they're right there. There was some embarrassing behavior. Few other OSU fans called them out towards the end of the game when they started getting a little mouthy as Mississippi State fans were leaving. A shout out to Bob from Red Cup Rebellion. Had a nice chat with him at halftime. Talked a little bit about the fake dog peeing incident. As far as he's concerned, he had a pretty good take. He's like, what does it matter? We weren't getting bowl eligible. So he didn't necessarily have a problem with it. I don't know, man. In a rivalry game, I would have just lost my mind. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter to them because they beat Mississippi State plenty of times. But if that was Bedlam and something like that happened, oh, God, so few opportunities. So anyway, basketball's good. I mean, what I watched this weekend was a tournament. This past weekend was a tournament team. That, without question, tournament team. So if they can stay healthy, that bench, my God, they're running 10 deep, no sweat, like 10, 11 deep. And if they can stay healthy, that'll allow them to keep up the energy, the intensity, which we saw die out last year because he didn't have the depth to keep it up. So, anyway, look forward to seeing that. Look forward to watching some more Oklahoma State basketball. Get to the gym because I'll tell you this right now, they looked way more impressive in person than they do on TV. What a difference to watch them up close like that over those two games. You definitely want. And listen, yeah, I'm a homer. If I was nearby, I'd be going to games, man. They really look good in person. A lot of fun to watch. Lots of fun to watch. Really athletic. Funny, that first game, Lindy kind of vanished. Holy mackerel! That second game, he came out and again looked like he was trying to look for his shot. Maybe Boynton spoke to him. I don't know. But man, when he's looking and feeling free about shooting, it's tough. He's got such a pure stroke. So anyway, that's my rant about basketball. It looks good. I'm looking forward to watching them move through the season. Bedlam. What do we say other than we hate it? I'll talk about the game first itself. And we'll talk a little bit about just the history of it and having just kind of a sense of reality about it. I mean, the mistakes. The mistakes, everybody. The mistakes. You had a turnover, key turnover. It's, a lot of times it's when things happen that really crush you. Oklahoma State, was driving. After score, I mean, really could have gone down and taken a lead 14-10 or tied the game up and fumbled. OU goes back down, scores, makes it 17-7, and there you had your 2-score difference. Honest to goodness, the game went right, just about exactly like I thought it'd go. Not real clean, felt kind of clunky. It just never felt to me like Oklahoma State was in the game. It felt like they were hanging on. Thought the game plan was a little unimaginative. God, there were some play calls that just blew my mind. The third down right before half. I mean, you're not going to take a shot at the end zone. You're not going to do something. I mean, here's a game where you got to score touchdowns, and you ran a third down play to center the ball for a field goal. I mean, and Gundy wants to come into his post game and talk about, well, you got to score touchdowns and not field goals. Well, that third down play was I'm going to make sure I get a field goal play. That's what that was. That to me was that just boiled it down to the whole thing right there. It just felt like we were trying not to get blown out. That's what it felt like. It didn't feel like we were trying to win. Felt like we were just trying to keep them off the field and not get blown out. The 4th and 2 late. I mean, oh God, you just go back and look at that play. If you come to the line and everybody is lined up into the short side of the field, OU's got one dude on the end free. You telling me that if you had run a quick pitch left to Chuba, he couldn't outrun that dude to the end? and made a first down. Not that it would have changed the outcome of the game. That's the part that aggravates me is I just felt like after last year, when Gundy was letting fly, you know, last year they played loose and they were letting it fly around. And yes, I know you didn't have Spencer and I know you didn't have Wallace, but it just felt like it was so conservative and it just felt like we just didn't want to get blown out. That's what it felt like. That's what it felt like. I'm not going to bust on Jim Knowles. Lincoln Riley is evil. He is evil incarnate. God, I wish he'd go somewhere else, but who knows who OU'd pick up after that. But man, I tell you what, you knew what was coming. That damn guard pull offense. I mean, it was like K-State, the QB running game. You knew what was coming, and we still couldn't do anything about it. I mean, what do you do? Because what was the last 48 seconds? I don't know what that was about. Still, I mean, I checked with our Cowboys Right for Free folks. Nobody had a comment about that. Not that I'm going to make a big deal about it. OU had the ball. Trey Sterling just got dinged pretty good. That he had to be helped off the field. I'm sure at that point it's like, what are you going to do? I mean, we're not going to win the game. We're down 3 scores. We're down 3 touchdowns, right? You're down 3 scores. You're down 3 touchdowns if you make what was it? You'd have to score 3 touchdowns. So, the fact that they ran off 48 seconds somehow or other, big whoop-de-doo. I'm not calling Gundy a quitter on that. That's if y'all want to be trolls about it, go ahead. But anyway, let's just talk a little bit about Bedlam and Gundy, because everybody wants to bag on Gundy. All right. I had some stats set up from a couple years back analyzing Bedlam. I know why would I go down this rabbit hole? But broke it down into a couple of things, and I did some more breakdown just kind of by hand. That's not going to be in this sheet, but essentially, look, OU is a way better football program than Oklahoma State. They have more better dudes. They traditionally have had more better coaching. And that could be for any variety of reasons. And you know what? When you have more better coaching, you have more better dudes, historically, you're probably going to get more of the breaks because your guys are going to be in more places at the right time than the other guys. I think OSU, that guy Brian Phillips that wrote that article about OSU being a long-suffering fan base. I think, over the course of the rivalry, Oklahoma State's probably gotten the lion's share of the bad breaks at critical moments that made a difference in a game. You can go back and look at games. But they got more good players. It's not to say that Oklahoma State hasn't at given moments hasn't had the best or the best 1 or 2 players on the field. But then when you look at the aggregate, OU's always going to have more better players on the field than Oklahoma State. All right? It's just that simple. And it's going to be a rare day that the level of talent between the aggregate, okay, is going to be so close that then the 1 or 2 guys who are better than anybody on the other side of the field, they're going to make the difference. Okay. We saw that in 1976. Oklahoma State, overall, the difference between OU's really good players and OSU's really good players was the gap wasn't as wide. And you throw Terry Miller in there, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate, one of the greatest running backs in OSU history, and that made a difference, right? Um, go to 98, you know, you had Hartley Dykes, Barry Sanders. Nobody on the OU side of the field was better than that. Clearly, those are the two best offensive skill players in the joint that night. And, a flag and a penalty. I'll talk more about that later. Blows that up. Well, I won't actually, but I mean, that's just one of the moments where horrible breaks, right? But you ended up with a guy who wasn't a dude. Gundy wasn't a dude. Okay, he was a decent college quarterback, but he wasn't a dude, and he probably made the best throw of his life in a key moment, which was great. And then you threw it to a guy who wasn't a dude, and he dropped it. God bless Brent Parker. He wasn't a dude, and he dropped it. That's what happens. If that's OU, chances are the guy they're pitching it to is a dude. All right, that's just the way it is. You go to the 2000s. OU plays kind of a crud game. Their strength was their defense, not necessarily their offense. They play kind of a crud game. OSU plays up. And you get a guy who comes out of nowhere and saves the day. I'm not talking about Rashawn Woods. I'm talking about T.D. Bryant. Because Josh Fields threw a pass up the middle of the field that was up for grabs, and T.D. Bryant made the play of his life, the play of his career, entire football career, by going up and snagging that ball instead of Roy Williams intercepting it. The next year, OU, I think, they just didn't come ready to play. They were unprepared. I just don't think they were ready to go. And, Rashawn Woods ran wild, but you also had two. Think again, Oklahoma State. What was that final score? 38-28, right? I think that was the final score in 2001. Where the heck am I here? 2002, 38-28 was the final score. Oklahoma State had 14 points based on luck. Now, that's not to say they wouldn't have gotten points if it hadn't been for the luck. But first touchdown of the game, I try to remember who the running back was. Maybe it was Seymour Shaw. I can't remember who the running back was. Ran, got tackled going out of bounds at around the, inside the 5 and fumbled. And the ball rolls into the end zone. Would have been a touchback, but an OSU guy was right there and fell on the ball for the touchdown. Okay. The other one was Josh Fields threw a pass into the end zone. I think it was their last score. Throws a pass into the end zone and goes right through the hands of an OU linebacker and drops into. Now I can't remember the tight end's name. Wouldn't have been Brett Belima, would it? I don't know. But went right into the tight end's hands for a touchdown. So even in that scenario right there, you had 2 years in a row where OSU either made just the ridiculous play, or you got a couple of breaks that went for touchdowns, and those things don't traditionally happen to OSU. So anyway, you could go to the 2014. I'm telling you right now, if Bob Stoops doesn't punt that ball the second time, OSU probably doesn't win that game. They don't even tie it to go into overtime. So the fact of the matter is, OU is just that much better of a football program than Oklahoma State. Always has been, and in any of our lifetimes is gonna always will be. Okay? You might have periods like in the late 90s when OU, shit themselves with their hiring. made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. OU made mistakes and ended up having some losing seasons. And hey, who would ever thought Bob Simmons in the 90s? Think about that. Bob Simmons in the 90s had more Bedlam wins than Gundy does. Right? What, 3 out of 6 years? And one of those was he had a tie in there somewhere too, I think. I mean, let's just look at this. Hang on a second. Bob Simmons, was that here? 2000. I mean, if that was Bob Simmons right there, he was 500 against OU. $500. Is that right? Bob Simmons. Let's check it out. Bob Simmons, Oklahoma State. Yeah, 95 to 2000. There you go. Bob Simmons went 3-3. What did he say right there? No. He had a winning. Did he have a winning record? No. Yeah. Yeah, that's not the winner right there. If I have to come back, the way my sheet's set up. Yeah. No, Bob Simmons coached for 6 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Yeah, and he had a 500 record. Went 3-3 against OU. That's how bad OU was in the late 90s. That's how bad they were. Okay, just to be clear. um, but think about that. That's nuts. So anyway, I guess where I'm headed with this. Guess where I'm headed with this is that you're not going. Gundy's been there 15 years. OU has been the superior football program for literally the entire 114 years in this rivalry. So over a century of football superiority is not going to be eliminated in 15 years. I don't care how much money, I don't care how good a football coach you are. You're not going to eliminate that dominance because at the end of the day, that dominance is more about dudes than anything. We talk about it all the time, recruiting. It starts with recruiting. A mediocre coach with a good recruiting setup is going to look like a really good coach because he's going to have dudes. Now, at some point, he's not going to win the championships. And sure, he might, they might can him, but you're still probably going to end up with decent coaches because you're going to be able to pay. But just over time, okay, over time, it's dudes make the difference. Period. All right, dudes matter. Now you got to have some coaching. Look at Michigan. I'm sure they have some dudes. They just don't have the right dudes, and then the coaching's stinking. So maybe they're doing a bad job recruiting. Right? That's really where you got to start. Is how are you recruiting? How are you evaluating your talent? It all starts there. And we know where OSU is in relation to OU with recruiting. So let's talk about Gundy. Okay, everybody and their brother wants to say that Gundy has an OU problem. Okay, I'm here to try to temper that argument just a little bit, and for this reason. Gundy doesn't have an OU problem. OSU has an OU problem. Okay? Historically, guys, Oklahoma State is winning at a rate of under 16%. 16% of the time. So out of every 100 games they can win, they're not winning. Out of 100 games, they're not going to win 16. All right? They're winning 15, but they're not winning 16. Okay? And since 1970, hasn't really changed. Now somebody will look at this and go, hey, all right, well, Gundy's winning at less of a clip. Okay? But let's say Gundy wins next year. So he'll have 3 out of 16, right? 3 out of 16. So 3 divided by 16. If Gundy wins one next year, he's now winning at a rate higher than the average. Okay? Let's say he wins one in 2 years. So that'd be that'd be 3 out of 17, right? 3 divided by 17. Let's say he wins one in the next 2 years, he's still going to be above that average rate. How about 18? Okay? At 18, if he wins 3 out of 18, he's still at a rate above that average. This average right here, the historical average. All right, so now if he doesn't win one, he wins another one by the time he gets to 19. That's 50. So he right at 3 wins in 19 years. That would be about the average right there. It'd be one, like that's his 15.8%. It'd be 15 point, well, it's 15.8%. That would be exactly the average. So if Gundy wins a game anytime in the next, 15, so 16, 17, 18, anytime in the next 3 years, he's above the overall average. Now, everybody's going to jump in here and go, "Oh my God! Well, but the team is doing so much better, and they're not winning games. So clearly, this is a problem." Okay, want to point a couple things out. Okay, overall, if you look at the margins here, right? So overall, Oklahoma State has improved. Not a lot, but they've improved, right? They've become more competitive on a regular basis. All right, so over the history, that's the margin of victory, regardless of the winner. Since 1970, 7/10 of a point, but just in the Mike Gundy era, okay, now you're getting down to 2 scores. You're getting close to 2-score games on average. You could argue that's really almost 2 scores with 2-point conversions. Okay. In OU, and I'm not going to worry about OSU wins and losses here in the Gundy era. He's only had 2, so big whoop-de-doo. But OU wins and losses, look at this. In OU wins overall since the 70s, Gundy era. All right. Now, that's obviously got something to do with Gundy. Okay? Got something to do with Gundy. If you look at the percentage of points being scored by the winners and losers, okay, in a game on average. So look at that. Games obviously getting closer, right? Games are getting closer. If you look at OSU wins, that right there is about the average, right? So he's maintaining the average in OU victories. Okay. So that's a pretty significant change right there, telling you just like this. The games are getting closer. Oklahoma State is more competitive. This just cracks me up. Total number of points scored in the series. Oklahoma State hasn't even scored half of what Oklahoma has scored. And wait till I tell you some other stuff here. Some of it you have to laugh. But there's also some of it that you're like, okay, well, maybe he's got a problem, maybe not. But if you just look at that overall, look at this overall, but look at what it is during the Gundy era. Okay? Look at what it is since the 70s. But look at that. Come on. There's no way you can tell me that, Gundy doesn't have an OU problem. He has a getting over the hump problem. Okay, if we just go back through the games, if we do, let's just go back through the game. Well, we'll just look at this. Here are the total points scored. Look at Gundy's first 5 years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5 years right here. He's been there 15 years. Look at his first 5 years, right? Getting lathered up. Look at his last 10. Okay. Average score of the game, 41.6 to 35.3. That's just the average scores of the game. That's not wins and losses, right? It's not the points during wins and points during losses. That's OU's averaging 41 points, 41.6 points a game. OSU's averaging 35.3 points a game. You know, you got to start somewhere, and it's starting with being more competitive. All right, and what this is showing me is that it started in one place and it continues to improve. Doesn't mean it's going to be like that all the time. OU is a better football program, and there are going to be years where OSU is down and OU is going to lather us up. All right. There's going to be years where OU is just a bad matchup for us, talent-wise, and it's, you know, we're going to get lathered up. So let me talk. I'm going to talk now about some other stuff that I just wrote down here. So if you go through the Gundy years, right? 05. Well, and I also want to take that for folks that don't want to give Gundy had a hand. He wasn't the head coach, but he had a hand in those two wins, 01 and 02. He was the offensive coordinator. All right. And he was hamstrung by the system Les Miles wanted to run. We were running a power I, for heaven's sakes. So, you know, that was the system. But I mean, the game plan in 2002 was just fantastic. It was brilliant. And that was Gundy. Okay. So if we go back to this, Gundy's first year as a head coach, blowout, right? We get killed. In 2006, OSU is driving, is down, you know, pretty close to the scoring zone. I don't think they were in the scoring zone. It might have been just outside the scoring zone, 25-yard line and in. Zach Robinson, the clock was running out. This was the next to last pass play, and Zach Robinson had a Darius Bowman on a deep slant, and if he hits Bowman, Bowman scores. And he just threw it too high. Bowman's a big kid, and Zach just missed him. Threw it too high. Bowman couldn't pull it down. And then we threw an incomplete pass on the last play of the game. 07, blowout. Okay. 08, a lot of people look at that and go, well, that was a blowout. With 13 minutes to go in that game, that score was 37-34 OU. Okay. 13 minutes to go in the game. That was a 37-34 game. Okay. So Oklahoma State was there, right? Could they finish? They couldn't finish, and we ended up getting run out of the place. 09, I'm telling you, Philip Slavin opened this wound, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pick at it myself. 09, Whedon had just come in, saved the day in the second half against Colorado. And if Oklahoma State goes down, think about this. If Oklahoma State goes down to Norman and wins Bedlam in a situation where OU was not having a good season, we had a chance to go down and win that game. If Oklahoma State wins that game, they play for the Big 12 title. They're in the Big 12 championship game, maybe, or they might have gone to a BCS bowl. I don't think they would have played in the Big 12 championship game. That was 09. Was that Colt McCoy? Did they play Alabama in the title game? 2009 Big 12 football. Yeah, Texas is undefeated. Right. Texas, yeah. But Oklahoma State was good enough. They had a shot at a BCS bowl. They had a BCS bowl on the line, and Gundy would not play Whedon. He as somebody said, he rolled out to Zach Weekend for Bernie's Robinson, and it was just a shellacking, a blowout, because Robinson couldn't throw the ball. That was terrible, just terrible. That was one of probably, I would argue that was likely number one. That was likely number one on the list of worst decisions Gundy ever made as a coach. 2010, with Whedon and Blackman, it was 40-38 with 2 minutes and 51 seconds to go. And our defense just couldn't stop OU. It was 40-38 with 2:51 left. All we needed was a stop. We get a stop there, we win that game. 2011, OSU blows them out. That team was just special, and I'll still argue that team was an accident. You know, the two greatest seasons in the history of Gundy were accidents. I'll talk about that more in a minute. 2012, we lost in OT. 2013, only the second time Oklahoma State walked into a game, and clearly the better team than OU. And we were some questionable play calling and a dropped interception from winning the Big 12 again. 2014, we got that break. Bob Stoops punted a second time. 2015 blowout, Rudolph's first year in Bedlam, first full season as a starter. 2016 ended up being a blowout. It was 24-17 with 10 minutes left in the third quarter. You know, so Oklahoma State's competing. They're there. 2017, 55-52 with $1:56 left. No James Washington. I went back and watched the end of that, and I'm going to tell you what, Mason Rudolph sucked. He 2 plays in a row. He missed Tyron Johnson wide open on the boundary, would have easily made the first down and gotten more. And then on 4th down, he missed a wide open Justice Hill, a little dunk over the middle, nobody within 10, 15 yards of him. He'd have turned and run for another. He might have scored. Who knows? Rudolph cost us that game on those two of the worst reads by quarterback ever. 2018, two-point conversion from beating them, and I don't mind that play call at all. And then this year's nothing but what could be considered a blowout. Oklahoma State was never really in the game, like I talked about earlier. So if you go through the course of these games, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So out of 15 years, 9 of those, Oklahoma State was in a position to either win or were being very competitive. It was a 1-score game in the second half of the game, meaning Oklahoma State was competing. You can't win unless you're competing, right? I mean, it's just that simple. So I'm not going to say Gundy has an OU problem. I don't think he does. I think Gundy's got a little bit of a Gundy problem, and that's making it difficult for him to get over the hump. Okay. A few more stats before I jump into the recruiting nonsense. So I broke things down into the decades. Okay, and just a couple of points. Okay, OSU, if you start in what did I do? I did 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Right. So in any 20-year period, Okay, 40s and 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. In the 2000s, 2000 to 2019, Oklahoma State won more Bedlam games in that 20-year period than they did in any previous 20-year period. All right. In the 2000s and 2010s decades, Oklahoma State for the first time won multiple Bedlam games well, no, I have to take that back. If you'd say 1990 and 2000, they won multiple Bedlam games if you put those two decades together. So you had 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Oklahoma State, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? That's 5 Bedlam wins from 1940 to 1979. No, 1989. Okay, so that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. In 50 years, Oklahoma State had 5 Bedlam wins. That's averaging 1 win every 10 years. In the last 30 years, Oklahoma State has 7. Okay? How's that math? How's that math work out for you? Okay, if we check that out, we know what 5 wins in 50 does, but 7 wins in 30. Now you're winning at a 23% clip versus that. Okay? I will say this, that we're starting a new decade. That's how I'm doing it. I'm not, people will argue about how you start a decade. I think a decade starts in the 0 year. That's what I go with. Because you want to say the 2020s, the 1920s. Well, that's 2021 to 29. If you look at the points, this to me is it's a riot, and it's interesting at the same time. Oklahoma State, prior to the 2010s, had never scored 200 or more points total in a decade in Bedlam. The highest they ever had was the 2000s when they scored 198. The next best previous decade was the 1940s, 155 points. 1970s, 146. 1990s, 144. 1960s, 131. 1980s, 113. How crappy was that? Think about that. The 80s, that was Thurman Thomas, Barry Sanders. In the 80s, Oklahoma State scored 113 points total in Bedlam. 48 of those points came in 2 games. And then the decade of all decades to forget about, the 1950s, the Bud Wilkinson era. Oklahoma State scored 47 points. I think OU scored more than that at least 3 or 4 times. At least, maybe 4 or 5. Scored more points than that in a game. And Oklahoma State had 47 in the entire decade. Another interesting stat, which is not kind of included in all this math, is Oklahoma State's first 8 wins in Bedlam, OU only scored in 2 of those games. They had 7 points in one game and 6 points in another. So a lot of the early Bedlam games were feast or famine. You were either scoring points or you weren't scoring it. And that's why I didn't include anything prior to 1940 in any of this. Because the football was just different. You could have a 3-3 game or a 6-6 game, weird stuff like that. Oklahoma has never scored less than 220 points in a decade. Oh, and to finish that, obviously in the 2010s, so the previous high for Oklahoma State was the 2000s at 198. And that was the only time they scored more than 155 in a decade. Oklahoma State scored 353 points. Okay. And that would have been good for number 4 on OU's list. All right. That would have ranked number 4, I believe. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. OU's never scored less than 220. They went 220 in the 90s. How bad were the 90s? The average scores of those games were OU 22, OSU 14. How terrible is that? They had 230 points in the 40s, 267 points in the 60s, 291 points in the 80s, 349 points in the 2000s, 375 points in the 50s, 416 points in the 2010s, and 70s, 463 points. The 70s that was the decade of the blowouts, man. OU had 463 points to OSU's 100. Look at that, 46 to basically 15, if you want to round off. Average score is 46 to 15. That's with Oklahoma State winning a game in the middle of all that, 31 to 28. All right, just abysmal. Margins of victory. Okay, so all I did was I didn't look at OSU wins. I just looked at OU wins. Okay, coming into this decade, the previous best was the 1960s. A horrible decade for OSU football, but I guess not a great one for OU. The average margin of victory for OU in the 1960s was 17.3 in Bedlam. Next closest was the 1980s, 17.8 points per game, per win. Okay. In the 2000s, which includes Gundy's first 5 years, and 2 Bedlam victories. Okay. 2 Bedlam victories, plus, a couple of close games in there. The average margin of victory for OU was still 20.5 in their wins. Was still 20.5. So that's almost 3 touchdowns when you're winning on average when they're winning the game. What were the 2010s? Average margin of victory for OU in the last decade, 12.5 points. Less than 2 touchdowns. Less than 2 touchdowns. If you want to tell me Gundy has an OU problem, I'm not going with that. I'm going with Gundy's whittling away at OSU's OU problem. Okay? Because he's clearly done that. Now, one of the drawbacks for him is really, we have found the enemy and he is us. Gundy can be his own worst enemy in this regard. And if Gundy is given the keys to the car, or let's put it this way: if Gundy is given an open pocketbook, all right, hey Gundy, go buy the car you want. Okay, go buy the car you want. He's going to go buy the car that is going to get you there, is really dependable, stays within the speed limit, okay, doesn't break down, doesn't get a flat tire, doesn't, whatever. That's where Gundy's going. Okay. The 2 greatest teams in the history of the school. I don't care. You can rattle off stats all you want. You can talk about Rudolph's team with James Washington. 2 greatest teams in the history of OSU were 2010, 2011. Sorry. Okay. 2013 was great, mostly because of the defense. That was without question. I mean, it's not even close. That was the best defense in Gundy's tenure. The offense was okay. Wasn't like, didn't have any what I would call marquee talent, just a lot of decent players, decent college players. So if you look back at the two greatest teams, you had some ingredients there that were outside Gundy's control. Number one, you had Holgerson as an offensive coordinator, and then you had Monken as an offensive coordinator. 2012, you had rotating quarterbacks. In 2013, you just had a brilliant defense. But the rotating quarterbacks, look what Monken did with those rotating quarterbacks. You don't tell me that guy wasn't fantastic. If I miss anybody, man, do I miss him. But the challenge you had there was with Holgerson and Monken, and Gundy will freely talk about it. They didn't give a crap about what Gundy said. They ran their system the way they wanted to run it, and they called their plays the way they wanted to call their plays. And Gundy, while you had a winning program, I guarantee you that gave him ulcers. I mean, just look at how he's hired, guys. He has hired to keep guys here. He is hired to have control of what they do. So he's hiring young guys, and he's got the ability to override them. He's hiring young guys that'll stay here a while because he wants stability. He'd rather have stability and guys that'll kowtow to him. And look, you're the head coach. It's your gig if that's what you want to do. But Gundy's conservative, and I just see his fingerprints, and we've talked about this. His fingerprints are all over things that the team has done. It's just all over things that the team has done in certain critical moments. In other moments when he's let it fly, God, they've done wonderful stuff. So that's number one. And number two, we've talked about it ad nauseum. Brandon Weeden, greatest quarterback without question, by far and away, in the history of the school. And he was an absolute accident, complete accident. Not recruited, tried to run him off. Started Alex Cade over him. Okay? That's it. Brought in an offensive coordinator that could work with him. Look what happened. Then you had Todd Monken who said, hey, look what I've got. And I'm going to let it fly. That's what this offense is about. That's where my talent is. And to me, if Gundy can't figure out, at the end of the day, do you have to have a quarterback who can sling it all over the field all the time to be the best team in the Big 12? No. I think you see that with OU this year. But you got to have a quarterback who can throw it and throw it efficiently. I think OSU's got that. He's young. We'll have to see. I just think over time, your formulas in 2010 and 2011, offensively speaking, better formulas than what you're doing now. Because you just spent 3 years with Mason Rudolph and a guy who can't run, and you basically turned OSU into just a throw it deep offense the vast majority of the time. Now, the greatest games they had were games where you were pitching it all over the field, crossing routes, slants, the whole bit. And just, they turned into a one-dimensional passing game where you're going to throw the quick out in the flat or throwing it deep. That's terrible. And, again, Gundy, same thing that happens to him with coaching, happens to him with recruiting. All right? You got to take chances in recruiting. And Gundy just doesn't take enough chances. You got to take chances on talent. You can't live on 2 and 3 stars that you're going to develop. You just can't. You got to sprinkle some 4-star guys in there. OSU's not going to get any 5 stars. They're not going to get 5-star guys unless you got a homer type situation. Unless you get a 5-star guy in Oklahoma who's just said, I've always dreamed of playing for Oklahoma State. All right. But you get some 4-star guys, go out there, be a little more aggressive on that front. You get you some 4-star guys. Now, some of those guys might be tough eggs, and that's where Gundy has a problem because Gundy wants, kids that were raised right. Mom and dad, you hear him say it all the time. Mom and dad raised him right, works hard, doesn't say a lot. That's what Gundy wants. He wants kids that are going to come in and not be problems to handle, right? Well, if that's the case, then you're gonna be passing on anybody over a 3-star. You're passing on most kids over a 3-star because they're gonna come in and thinking they're pretty good and they're gonna expect to play, and you're gonna have to take your chances on those guys. Gundy just doesn't take his chances on those guys. Hoops is a little different. I know people talk about Boynton and the recruits he's getting. Hoops is a little different. Hoops it's a different animal. A lot easier to take your recruiting resources and pour them into going and getting a higher 4-star guy, because that's exactly what happens. You're working so hard to go find 3-star guys with talent and get them nailed down, maybe a 2-star diamond in the rough, that you maybe don't have the resources available to go after the 4-star guys. If you go after them, you're going to lose some of your 3-star guys, and if you're losing out on your 4-star guys, what do you got? So it's a little of this, a little of that. But Gundy just doesn't take enough chances. One final little area here. So if you look at the total points scored by the teams over the history of the series, right? Some of this is funny, sad, whatever. Oklahoma State. So if you break Bedlam into the first half, second half, right? First 57 games, second 57 games. Oklahoma State has scored 75% of their points in the series in the last 50% of the games, in the last 57 games, right? In the first 57 games in this, Oklahoma State scored 248 points. Are you kidding me? Clear that. 248 divided by 57. Oklahoma State averaged 4.4 points a game over the first 57 years of Bedlam. That is absolutely brilliant. That's just so sad and so brilliant at the same time. First 57 years gets you into what did I come up with? I think it was like 1960 something. 1968. 1968 was the 57th meeting. And so up through 1968, Oklahoma State averaged 4.4 points per game. How about that? Is that just great stuff? That's, oh, God. You look at the second 57, and now you're talking. So they averaged 18.6 points a game in the second 57. All right. Now, if you look at Gundy, Oklahoma State's averaging 29.7 points a game in the Gundy era. All right. The total points scored in the Gundy era for OSU, 31.6% of, so almost a third of OSU's Bedlam points have been scored. So let's say 31.6% of the points have been scored in 13.2% of the time. How about that? All right. Now, obviously, OU's numbers have gone up because, again, the thing is skewed by those early years. But OU's, it's slightly more evened out. OU had 1,351 in the first 57 games. So that's 23.7 points a game. They had 1931 in the next 57. So that's 33.9 points a game, almost 34 points a game. In the Gundy era, they're averaging 41.5 points a game. So they've scored 18.8% of their points in 13.2% of the time in the Gundy era. The Gundy era is 15 years out of the total of 114. That's 13.2% of the total time. So Oklahoma State has done way better in that period of time. They've obviously improved, but they've done way better in that period of time than OU has done, relatively speaking, in the series in this regard. So, again, I'll just go back to this. Gundy doesn't have an OU problem. OSU has an OU problem. Gundy has tightened the gap over the course of his tenure. Over the course of 15 years, you can show that Oklahoma State has consistently grown more competitive. Are they winning games? No. Still not winning games. Still need breaks. And I don't care how good OSU gets, how competitive we get, 7 or 8 out of 10 years, at least, maybe 9 out of 10 years, OU's walking in the building with better dudes. Some years it's overwhelming. Some years the difference isn't that great. And then you're going to get a year or two maybe where, no, they're not the better team. We've got the dudes. We can do this. So, the problem I think Gundy has goes back to Gundy. What he wants to have in a program, how he wants to build his program, the way he recruits, and the way he coaches his coaches more than anything. And that's Gundy, and that's his gig, right? He's the greatest coach in OSU history. This is the golden age of OSU football. Who knows what we're going to get? I think they've clearly set the recipe. I think you got to find an OSU alum so that this becomes a destination type of a job for that person. But it's, quit blaming Gundy for having an OU problem. OSU has an OU problem, people, and we always have from the beginning. It's always been that way. All right, so what's happening now is nothing different than what's happened, in previous decades, and there's been plenty of decades. If you go back to it, there's only been one decade where Oklahoma State won more than 2 games in that decade. And that was the 1990s, thanks to Bob Simmons. Bob Simmons, the man. Let's all go get Bob Simmons, because otherwise the team sucks, but he beat OU. He dragged OU down into the abyss. His presence ruined OU football. His presence in Stillwater ruined OU football. So that's it. That's a long one to close out the regular season of football. It's unbelievable it's over with. I think there's a lot to look forward to, a lot of intrigue in the offseason, whether I think Chuba you're going to know pretty fast. Wallace is obviously out and won't play at the bowl, but Chuba you'll know pretty fast. If he plays in the bowl game, then I think there's obviously a chance he comes back. I think he'll probably, he's probably going to talk to folks and say, look, do I need to play in the bowl game to increase my draft stock, right? Do I need to go out with a bang to really put myself in a better position? If people are telling him, bowl game's not going to really put you up there and it might hurt you, then if he doesn't play, then he's gone. If he does play, maybe there's a chance he stays. Wallace, I think, will come back. That's kind of my 50-50 guess. Coming off the knee injury, it's a deep wide receiver class. People have pointed that out already. I think he needs to come back and kind of reprove himself, prove that he's back off the injury. And then we got Spencer Sanders should play in the bowl game. I don't care. Don't let him play. Let Drew Brown have his day. Don't take a chance. There's no need to take the chance. And then you go into spring ball. And you've got recruiting. You got the early signing period coming up. Let's see what Oklahoma State lands. Kind of the usual recruiting class again. Nothing too splashy going on. We'll wait and see. I don't know about the rest of you. I know that a lot of you be probably rooting for Baylor to beat OU. I'm rooting for OU to win. I'm rooting for OU. I'll say it. If any chance the Big 12 has of getting in the college football playoff would be OU if Utah wins. If Utah barely wins, then maybe OU will jump them. Baylor's not going to jump Utah. If Utah wins big, it's a moot point. If Utah loses, I think the winner of OU Baylor would get in there. I mean, we'll see where the committee puts Baylor. If Baylor's right behind OU, if it's Utah fifth, and Georgia's going to drop down, right? LSU should beat Georgia. Well, God, we hope so. If Georgia beats LSU, then that blows everything up. But I say blows it up. I mean, that blows because I don't think a one-loss LSU drops below Utah. So I think if Baylor's right behind OU and Utah loses, then and LSU's got to beat Georgia, then the winner of OU Baylor would make the playoff. If assuming LSU beats Georgia and Utah wins, OU's got to win. OU will be the only chance to jump Utah. Baylor, they're not going to jump Baylor over Utah if Utah just kind of barely ekes one out. If OU goes out and blows Baylor out, then even if Utah wins the game somewhat easily over Oregon, then OU could potentially jump them. But an LSU win and a Utah loss is the easiest path. That's the most straightforward path. And I'm rooting for. I hate Baylor too much. I don't want them in the playoff. Please don't. Don't want them there. For a school that's going to represent the Big 12, that is not the school I want representing the Big 12, period. So, anyway, that's it for, picks from JOES for the regular season. We'll do something for the bowl game, and we'll chime in a few times during the basketball season, but it's been a great ride. And here we go into the off season. Let's hope basketball is as good as they looked. And we'll look forward to the bowl game. So everybody travel safe. Enjoy the run up to the holiday season, and we'll be talking to you in a few weeks. Go Pokes.